All right, this is the last presentation for World War One and additional things that happened at the end of the war and so forth. All right, so before the U.S. enters the war, remember they had neutrality, but you could tell they leaned towards allies for a few different reasons. First off, the U.S. preferred democratic governments such as France and Great Britain. It gave much larger loans, $2 billion to the allies, and very little to the Germans. It's like 27 million or something like that. Very, very little comparatively. Also, the U.S. traded with Great Britain and France because there was the Great Britain blockade. The United States wouldn't even necessarily be able to get goods to Germany anyways, okay? And President Wilson made public statements against Central Powers. He was worried about some of the things they're doing, some of the aggression, and you could tell he wasn't really for them to begin with, okay? So, why the U.S. entered the war? Then it was because of the unrestricted submarine warfare. So submarines, they could sink any ship in the waters around Great Britain. So that was Germany's stance, having this unrestricted submarine warfare. And the problem with that, or for the U.S., the problem was it actually ended up sinking Lusitania, which was that passenger ship going from America to Great Britain. When it sunk, it almost killed 1,200 people, and 128 were American, about 120 or so were children. So Wilson threatened to end diplomatic ties. You think, well, big deal. Well, that just shows another progression towards war. So Germany, didn't want to, but they signed the Sussex Pledge, and they stopped doing. They agreed not to sink passenger ships and cargo ships, things like that. But while the Germans were not faring very well in the war, they turned back and started using unrestricted submarine warfare again in 1917. And if you look at just something I want to point out is right here's a newspaper the day after or so, and it says Lusitania takes by the submarine, probably 1,260 dead. So this is just a good example of how the information that first comes out in reporting, especially when communication was slow, it's not always the most accurate. Some of these people, like we saw in the video, came back to life. Also, they say twice torpedoed. Remember, actually, there was not a second torpedo. Rather, it was the boiler exploding, they think. But there you go. All right, so that, along with the Zimmerman telegram, remember the United States took Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas from Mexico, and basically Zimmerman's telegram, that was the defense minister from Germany, send a telegram to Mexico saying, hey, how about you guys attack the U.S. and we'll help you take back that territory. And this really turned Americans against Germany as well. So with that, shortly after Wilson declares war, in April 1917. All right. And there was congressional agreement on that too. So let's look at the end game. Well, not exactly this end game, but rather the U.S. coming. So this is a huge help. We had U.S. conscription. It raised American troop levels from less than 1 million to 5 million quickly. It was a huge help for the Allies to have this fresh troops come in. They weren't sitting in the muddy trenches for 3 years like the rest of the troops. Unfortunately, Russia did withdraw from World War One. The Bolshevik government disagreed with it, and they pulled out. They actually signed a treaty with Germany as well. But with the new troops coming in, there was this kind of turning the tide was the Second Battle of Marne in France. Germany put a offensive battle basically for the Germans, but they had heavy casualties. More than half the casualties were just the Germans. Okay, Great Britain, America, France, they all lost troops, but it was mostly Germans. So this was, the last aggression really by the Germans, and from there on it was defensive, and it wasn't much later that they fell. Okay. So kind of total casualties of World War One, just kind of looking at it. The Allies are in blue, Central Powers in red. So you can see the Central Powers lost a lot by far. Germany had the most losses compared to the other two Central Powers, and the United States, of course, we're way down here because we got in so late. Oh, sorry, I'm in the way, aren't I? Got in so late, but you can see France was the big loser. I'm sorry, not France. Sorry about that. Russia was the big loser when it came to Allied deaths. Okay, same with World War II. You're going to see Russia takes a big hit. When you don't have the technology, your troops are more in danger. So the armistice was signed, and this was November 11th, on the 11th hour of the 11th month, on the 11th day, right? And that stopped the fighting. It was just that agreement to stop fighting at that moment. So we see the Paris Peace Conference. There was the big four. That was Woodrow Wilson, the USA, there's France, Britain, and Italy were there. You don't need to remember all their names, but these are the four countries represented. And notably, though, so this was to decide what's going to happen with Germany. What's the actual terms of peace? All right. So Germany and Russia were not present. You'd maybe think Germany wouldn't be present, but they probably should have been. And Russia was not present because Allies didn't recognize the legitimacy of Russia's new Bolshevik government. And that was Lenin and the Communist Party. So they were not present there. Okay. Also, sorry, repeated slide there. Before even this conference, though, Wilson had his 14 points. This plan was before the war even ended. He thought these things would help keep peace in Europe. And so one idea was limitation of arms, Germany withdraw troops from other nations, free trade and travel international waters, and end to all secret alliances. Also a couple, so some of these ideas made it into the Treaty of Versailles. And also self-determination, restore the freedom to some lands and countries, peoples of nations could choose what style of government the people wanted. It didn't have to be democracy. All right. And then the League of Nations was also an idea that he supported strongly, the International Assembly of Nations, basically to keep peace. So all these ideas he took and wanted to fit into the Treaty of Versailles. A lot of these ideas did make it in, but not exactly maybe the way he wanted. Okay. So him coming there and working on this treaty, this is basically the terms that you see that they're trying to address, but also each country had their own viewpoints of what should happen. It was a reduction in the German army. They were only limited to 100,000 people, and they banned conscription, banned weapons makings. They didn't have to give up all their weapons, but they weren't supposed to make new ones. They had to give up certain things. They had to give up their submarines and air force, and reduce the size of the Germany. They lost the Alsace and Lorraine of France to France, that area. Poland ended up taking part of Germany as well, or the independent Polish area, and took away all of Germany's colonies, and those were basically made, had independence at that point. And it made Germany pay reparations. So it's funny that they said, okay, Germany, got to give up your colonies, but we don't. And then they made Germany pay reparations, which was very expensive. It really was difficult on the German people to come up with that cash. And they made Germany accept blame for causing the war. This is pretty harsh. And that's unfortunate. All right. So Germany felt resentment about the loss of war, and Versailles left Germany weak, and really just the weak economy. The punishment of it all laid the groundwork for Nazism. This was Hitler's battle cry of like how unjust this is, and we don't deserve this. We need to fight back. So I'd play this video, but I'm not going to. We'll watch this in class, but you could play it yourself. But it just kind of shows you how it, basically laid the groundwork. How World War I never really ended in a way, and it led to World War II. Okay, not going to play that though. All right. So question is, so United States never ended up joining the League of Nations. And the question to me is like, why? And it's because Congress didn't ratify the Treaty of Versailles. Senators were concerned with the cost and military obligations of it. And like we can see here, they are the key to it. It would have made a much stronger alliance or League of Nations, right? So this is kind of the precursor to the United Nations. There's still people's concerns with the cost and military obligations of, NATO, for example, or the United Nations. But so yeah, the United States never entered. Maybe it would have made a difference. I don't know. Also, just kind of look at the political map, how things changed. As we can see, the Baltic nations right here, these are these countries. They gained independence. Poland, for example, has been around a very long time, but at one time Germany took part of it, Russia took part of it, like the Russian Empire took these areas as well. So a lot of these nations did exist at one time, but were eaten up by Russia and Germany, and so this area has always been in flux a little bit. But now today, these places still do exist. The borders have changed some, but they're nations now again. Austria-Hungary Empire breaks up, and they kind of break along ethnic lines. And then the Ottoman Empire does shrink. It loses more. You can't really see all of it here, but it ends up becoming Turkey. Okay. And Italy and France grow. So you can see Italy takes a little bit of the Austria-Hungary country, and then France ends up getting this area as well. which they did have pre. All right, and also kind of fits with World War One is the influenza pandemic of 1918-19, also known as the Spanish flu. And what we can see there is that, hold on a second here, that it actually, really a better term for it would be called the American flu, if you like to go with nation of origin, or at least where it's first detected. It started in Kansas with troop levels, or military base. It was first detected there in the March of 1918. And when those U.S. troops were deployed to Europe, it spread from there. So we see U.S. troops being carried it to Europe. And then the second wave is really when the U.S. troops go home. So it starts in March time, April, May, kind of dies down, and then in October it really picks up. So the troops start coming home in October, November, December, and that global troop movements, other countries even going back, even the colonies, remember, like, colonies helped out in Europe as well, end up going back, and that was the deadliest one. It was very deadly. You know, it would kill a healthy person possibly in 24 hours. Not everyone, of course. You know, a lot of people survived it, but it could kill someone in 24 hours, which is crazy. It affected the 20 to 40-year-old the most. Yes, it affected old and young and stuff, but like 20 to 40 though, that's you know, very unique. And it peaked in early winter, so, you know, November, December time. And there was the third wave as well, so there's a second wave right there going back to all these different places, and then a third wave coming from Australia over there. So you see like reiterations and surges as well. And so you kind of see here's the second wave right here, much larger. All right, so what was the impact of the Spanish flu? The reason it's called the Spanish flu, though, is the Spanish government allowed the media to report it. So the newspapers, they were the first to do it. So that's where people first heard about it. But it was actually reporting how it was in Europe. But again, historians think it's traced back to Kansas. It was an avian origin, so like a bird flu of some sort, H1N1 virus. You could think of it that way. Now, the flu's actually, there's records of the flus existing before Christ, like 400 BC. I think it was the Greeks noted it, having similar symptoms to what we think of the flu today. So it's probably been around for more than 1,000 years. But again, it's a virus that changes often and adapts. But this one is an avian origin, they believe. And there's actually the DNA of flu right now. Some of that DNA you could still see that existed from 1918 flu. So we're still kind of dealing with it in a way, but it's not the same. Nearly 500 million people got it, and so that was a third of the world affected, or close to at least. And it killed 50 million people. So it had a death rate of about 10%. That killed more than all of World War I, if you include all the troops and civilians. And actually half the U.S. troops died from it in Europe during World War I. In Europe and then coming back. So, some of these scenes look, it's on a porch. They divide people up as best they could. They didn't have plexiglass, so they used cloth, right? Life expectancy actually dropped 12 years in the United States just from that 1 year. I mean, it went down a little bit. Some people say because of the war, but also when you have 20 to 40-year-olds dying, that really pulls the life expectancy down. So under 40 years old. Then it popped right back up to almost 55 years old the next year. You also see, public health, reaction in the United States. You can kind of make some correlations today. There was no effective treatment, though. That's one different. There's no antiviral, so to fight the actual virus. And there was also no antibiotics that would fight, pneumonia or other infections that you could get from the virus after the virus, so like you get one thing and then, you can join with another. Prevention had a scattered approach. So some cities did nothing. And other cities canceled gatherings, churches, parades, theaters, that type of stuff. They even shut down schools at some point. And then some places even mandated masks or you would be fined. Places, they would haul you off to jail, even like this photo shows here. And again, that wasn't necessarily widespread, but there was definitely mask mandates. And I like this article right here. Flu deaths here, non-essential may be ordered to close. Non-essential, I thought that was like a new term, right? So they actually were already using that over 100 years ago. People conducted businesses outside as well. This is an example of a court taking place outside. Social distancing, that's one difference though. They didn't, that wasn't really known, or that wasn't really a thing. The best they could do is think, how do we not breathe the same air? So be outside, wear a mask, separate with sheets, things like that. But social distancing wasn't a thing. So interesting to see some of the commonalities and differences. Okay. All right. That's it. So hope you enjoyed the end of World War I, and we'll be on the path to World War II here in just a little while. All right. See ya.